In the past, students have had trouble coming up with topics on their own, so I thought that I would change the course and suggest at least 4 possible topics for you to get the idea of what you could do. You don't have to choose any of these, but I tried this out and it seemed to be popular. The problem was that some of the variables that you can use in a study aren't nearly as obvious. So for example, the second question there, does gender affect time spent binge viewing television programs, is pretty straightforward. Binge viewing could be defined as how many times you watch several episodes of the same show, and gender is pretty easy to measure. The same way with political affiliation and time spent reading the newspaper. Very straightforward. What I found out the first time I used these variables was that a variable like narcissism is a little troublesome because not everybody can agree on what narcissism is. The same is true of the suggested topic, fear of missing out. I found that students were trying to write questions that combined fear of missing out with Facebook, or they were trying to combine narcissistic behavior with posting of pictures on Instagram, and they couldn't really separate them out. In an attempt to solve that, I made this video. It's easier to watch something than to read something. Let's take a look at narcissism. Narcissism is particularly troublesome. That's because narcissism is part of the dark triad of psychology. Narcissism, which is being stuck on yourself, wanting to be the center of attention, is lumped in with Machiavellianism, trying to control other people, and psychopathy, which is even deeper and darker. But let's focus on narcissism. According to Wikipedia, it's characterized by grandiosity, pride, egotism, and a lack of empathy. Most of us think of narcissism as being egotistical. Perhaps those who post a lot of pictures on Instagram, we don't know until you measure it, are egotistical. Or they display excessive pride. As is true in most of social science, it's hard to create good questions, so I suggest you just borrow them from existing studies. As long as you cite the source of your questions, you often get a better question than if you wrote your own. The best way to do that is to go to scholar.google.com. In this particular example, I had somebody searching for fear of missing out. Look at a few studies, choose the best questions you can find. Don't worry if you find a study that has 10 questions and you only want 2, choose the best 2 or the best 3 for your own measurement. After all, this is not a real study you're doing. It's a classroom exercise for which you're getting a project grade. I looked through Google Scholar and found a study that measured fear of missing out. And it did it in such a way that it didn't mention social media at all. In this case, the responses were about how true the statement was about the respondent. Here's a list of the 10 as published by a study by some people with some pretty unpronounceable names, so I won't even try. And I highlight 3 of them. Again, if you find a list of 10 questions that someone asked, you can choose any 2 or 3 and use them in your study. I fear others have more rewarding experiences than me. I get anxious when I don't know what my friends are up to. It bothers me when I miss an opportunity to meet up with friends. There are 7 other type statements that you could use to measure fear of missing out. Notice that none of them have anything to do with social media, and that's what you want. You want to measure something separate from your dependent variable, which might be time spent on Facebook. If you choose to use narcissism, you have the same predicament. Your goal is to measure 2 variables independently of each other in separate questions, and then use those separate responses to see if there's some connection between the variables using the tactics taught in Chapter 12 of your book. There is a 16-item measure of narcissism that's derived from a much longer 40-item measure. You can cite this study, and then you can take the list of 16 questions and pare them down to maybe 3 or 4 questions. Here's a copy of the study. It's by Ames, Rose, and Anderson. In the appendix to that study, they list the 16 items they use. Again, you only need 2 or 3. For example, I know that I am good because everybody keeps telling me so. I like to be the center of attention. I think I'm a special person. I like having authority over people. I find it easy to manipulate people, which crosses into Machiavellianism. Everybody likes to hear my stories. I'm going to be a great person. I'm an extraordinary person. Well, you get the idea. If you choose 3 of those items and put them in your survey, you can measure narcissism without even talking about social media or Instagram or Facebook. That's the idea. Measure your variables separately and use statistical tests to link them to the dependent variable that you have. I hope that helps you devise questions for your questionnaire if you choose a difficult variable like fear of missing out or especially narcissism. See you next time.